Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, thank you, Cheryl, for coming tonight, and thank you for your delegation. Just to start off, I'm sure we can all agree that the concerns, that it's Council's obligation to ensure that these concerns are addressed. You've spoken to a number of measures that the developer will take in regards to a construction mitigation plan. But given that this is a first development of this magnitude in the town of Aurora in a stable neighborhood, are your assurances based on past experiences in the redevelopment of a golf course in a stable neighborhood? So before you answer, simply put, has this developer ever redeveloped a golf course in a stable neighborhood in another municipality?
Ms. Jindrak?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Maracas. Each development site brings its own set of challenges and opportunities. And so we approach each site with taking into consideration the challenges that are there and working with the municipality to ensure the appropriate measures and protocols are put in place to deal with those issues as they arise. And I'm confident, based on our team and our team's experience, that the way we've approached this development site is appropriate, and we have the means by which to modify our processes going forward if necessary. I think your staff have done a great job putting us to the test to ensure that we are conducting ourselves appropriately. And if necessary, we will work with them to make whatever modifications are necessary. But I'm confident that our team has put forward an excellent suite of measures.
Councillor?
Thank you, and through you. So, and that's great that all these measures have been put in place, but simply my question is just, has the developer ever redeveloped a golf course in a stable neighborhood in any other municipality?
Ms. Jindrak?
Well, the answer to that is no, sir, because we have not developed any other golf courses.
Councillor?
Thank you. So now I guess it's fair to say then, and I guess I'll just finish that, it's the first of a kind for the development for this developer and for this municipality. So, but I thank you for your delegation tonight.
Councillor Abel?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you very much for coming to delegate. I appreciate the memorandum pointing out on each part of the notice of motion how you have addressed that concern with staff. And had anyone called, I guess no one had called you about this before, but you received the notice, and that's when you provided us that email for staff and for us to review. And we have that in receipt. I think it's only fair to ask, have you done developments in stable neighborhoods before?
Ms. Jindrak?
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor, thank you, Councillor Abel, for that question. We have developed in other areas where we are in an infill, stable neighborhood situation. Our project, one example that you could, I could refer to is our site in downtown Stouffville, which is in a stable neighborhood. And it's proceeding according to all the processes that have been put in place without any incident. But it does require closer collaboration, more communication, and that's exactly what we've done here.
Councillor?
Thank you very much. And I wasn't aware of the detail and the one-on-ones that you had done. But I have talked to some residents, and you have been working with the Ratepayers Association closely on all these steps. Is that a fair comment?
Ms. Jindrak?
Yes, that's a very fair comment.
Councillor? Councillor Gardner?
Thank you for coming. And as you can appreciate, we're glad to hear from you from the developer's point of view. This motion is from the council point of view. And just a couple of things. The dust fence, it's a slightly different height than in the construction mitigation plan. So that's something that I appreciate if staff look at. And I guess that's all for now. Thank you.
Councillor Perry?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you to Cheryl. Cheryl, is there anything in this motion that you weren't already considering to undertake? Or is there anything in this motion that you are unwilling to undertake?
That we are unwilling to take. As I hope my correspondence and presentation explains, I think we're doing all of that and more.
Counselor?
Thank you. I appreciate having your perspective. So us moving this motion wouldn't in any way, offend isn't the right word, but that's the only one that's coming to mind. Your organization, because again, as you stated, these are already things that you're looking to undertake.
Ms. Shindrick, just, yeah, we have to
I'm
wait.
sorry.
We switched the microphone on.
Mr. Mayor, through you to Councillor Peary. My only concern, if I have a concern, is that there appears to be an additional step being placed into the process that is not typical, not contemplated in the minutes of settlement, or nor contemplated necessarily in your existing policy approaches to implementation. So that would be my only concern.
Councilor Perry?
So the first response that you had given me is that there is nothing in this motion that you're unwilling to undertake. So from my perspective, it might be unorthodox, but it's not something you're unwilling to proceed with. Is that my understanding?
Ms. Shindrick?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the extent that the additional step affects timing, the timelines, it does present a concern.
Thank you. Councilor Thompson?
Thank you for coming this evening, Ms. Shindrick. I think we can all agree that the scale and magnitude of this project will be in fact impactful to the residents in the area and can be disruptive. And so I'm sure you understand Council's perspective in that we want to make sure that everything is being done possibly to mitigate that kind of a disruption. And so there's naturally going to be concerns about the construction plan because it's going to take a fair bit of time. And so you've spoken about, you feel that you've taken an appropriate steps to do that and mitigate those. And there's a suite of measures that you've put in place. But if through this discussion, some other reasonable requests are going to be made to add to those suite of measures, are you prepared to keep an open mind to them?
Ms. Shindrick?
Mayor, through you to Councillor Thompson. Yes, we are always open to keep an open mind, or open to keep an open mind, yes.
Councilor Kim?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I guess this question is along the lines of what Councillor Peary already asked Mrs. Shindrick. But if I were to put it another way, I'm not sure, I'll probably get the same answer, but what risks do you see if this motion goes through? We all know that we've heard that everything that's been outlined in your letter response, it seems to clarify that you guys are already doing the things that this motion is requesting. But what are some of the downside risks, if any, do you foresee if we were to move forward with the motion?
Ms. Shindrick?
Mr. Mayor, through you to Councillor Kim. Again, so it's a timing concern. We don't really understand how this additional step would work. Commitments are being made to residents, to homeowners, to implement certain things, and so really it's the mystery surrounding the timing of this additional step and the nature of it and how it functions. And so in our humble opinion, the controls are all there to ensure that the residents of the community are protected through the measures, the securities that are posted, and so our concern really is that there is an additional step in the process.
Councilor?
And from all the people that I've heard from, you guys have been, I'm sure, none of the residents would have preferred a development in their back door, but that's water under the bridge. And I think everything I've heard, Dranium has been very reasonable and accommodative. So thank you for all of that. Has Dranium ever been to the OMB in another project?
Ms. Shindrick?
Mr. Mayor, through to Councillor Kim, yes.
Councilor?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Once that appeal's been heard and the verdict was given. Has any other municipality given such a request or a motion midstream after the minutes of settlement has been agreed upon?
Ms. Shindrick?
Mr. Mayor, through to Councillor Kim, I can't say that I can recall, Councillor.
Councillor?
Okay. If Mr. Muno were to be able to bring back a report to assuage the authors of the motions by, say, July or even the latest August, how would that impact the timelines for you?
Ms. Shindrick?
Mr. Mayor, through to Councillor Kim, I have no issue with the report coming. I think council should be updated, and there should be reports provided to council in terms of how things are working. The step of there being this report, I don't know what happens to it when it comes to council and what that then means for the execution of any agreements that are underway and working their way through the process. So an update to council, by all means, I would hope that would happen.
Councillor Kim?
I agree that a regular report should come to council, given the gravity and given, our responsibilities to residents, and we are just as much concerned over their experiences throughout this process. And I'm sure there's always going to be hiccups in any size, whether it's within an infill or open field. There's always going to be any hiccups, whether it's small or medium-sized. Or Mr. Mayor, may I ask a question to HCDI's lawyer? She brought them to respond to any questions.
Could you ask your counsel to come down, please?
Hi, thank you for coming. I guess my one question is, given that we know the minutes of settlement, would this motion and this request be considered a breach of the agreement, of the settlement, in your opinion?
Ms. Beckman?
It's clear that the contents of this motion were not contemplated in the four corners of the minutes of the settlement. And as Ms. Shindrick has indicated, one of the concerns we have is how this type of a motion would be interpreted and implemented along the way, because it is also outside of the standing protocols that the municipality currently has in place for processing applications. So one of the things that does concern us is the possibility that the motion, when implemented, could be, in fact, proceeded with in a way that is inconsistent with the minutes of settlement. Clearly, it's not my role to give this council its legal advice. You have your own independent legal counsel, but that is at the crux of legally a concern we would have about how this motion would operate in the real world, while in no way undermining in any respect the clear commitment of this developer to do exactly what the town expects of it.
Councillor Kim?
Yes. So I guess my interpretation is that on the surface, the motion and the requests asked are not necessarily a breach, but the concern would be how it can be interpreted and how the journey may fare, and it may kind of weave and turn into something that could be potentially a breach. That's how I'm interpreting it. Is that right?
Ms. Beckman?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. In fact, that's correct, because it does add a layer of process that was not contemplated in the minutes of settlement. And as Ms. Shindrick has indicated, that it's both a process issue and concern. It also presents the possibility that decisions taken in the future will be inconsistent with the minutes, and that in fact opens up an area of communication that frankly we don't believe is necessary, and that has been said multiple times by Ms. Shindrick. This developer is more than happy to have a totally open book with this council, with staff, and to continue this conversation, because it will be an ongoing conversation as development proceeds.
Councillor Kim? Councillor Marcus?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to the delegate. I think it's great that that as the developer you've put forward all these measures and and you're looking to alleviate any of the concerns, also to mitigate any of the disruptive factors that would happen during the construction. But do you not feel that it is this council's obligation to ensure that that staff bring back a report on how they are going to make sure that they're going to hold the developer accountable to make sure that what you're saying is going to happen is actually going to happen?
Ms. Shindrick?
Your Worship, through you to Councillor Marakis, absolutely we agree that that's appropriate. And the problem becomes when does that happen, and the potential for it to never be done, never be accepted. That is the concern, that the report is not accepted, and then we don't know what happens after that. So you have our commitments to deal with matters as they come up, but I don't know what time frame I'm stepping into with this motion.
Councilor Marcus?
Okay, thank you. And I wasn't really going to ask another question, but it was brought up as far as a comparison with the development in downtown Stouffville. And just so I can wrap my head around this, are we comparing a 67-unit condo to a development which is on the main street, to a development that's within a residential neighborhood that has 159 units plus a condo? So I just don't see how you can compare those. I can't see that being apples to apples. I don't think that's a fair comparison.
Ms. Shindrick?
Worship, through to Councillor Marakis. It's not an apples to apples comparison, but the principles are the same. It's an existing established area. It's a very tight site. There are lots of interface issues and that are being managed, and so the scale may be different, but the principles are all the same, and they need to be managed in a very responsible way as well. And so, we'll be moving through the site on a phase-by-phase basis. And so I see the similarities being quite the same, with a difference in scale.
Councillor?
Thank you for your explanation, but for me, the scale is what's, to me, is the big difference in the whole development. But once again, I thank you for your delegation, and I'll look forward to the discussion with my colleagues at the table. Thank you.
Councillor Abel?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And so I think it's fair that I get clear exactly what the additional step is, and if you could just explain what the concern, spell it out, the additional step.
Worship, through to Councillor Abel, I'm not entirely sure what how the additional step will play itself out, but to me, I see that there is a report to come to council, which we fully agree. Council needs to know what is going on out in that site from your staff. The step where, prior to the execution of an agreement, this report must come, and I don't know what council is to do at that point. It looks to me like council needs to then say, okay, execute the agreement. Now, many of these measures are actually a schedule to those agreements. So, and the securities are posted as part of those agreements. So it's that step of, if we say no, the agreement shouldn't be executed, it has the potential to bring this, to create a lot of problems for a lot of people. Not only us, but those that are relying on the works that we've committed to doing as part of those agreements.
Councillor?
So, Mr. Mayor, and I think I've captured it here. It's in the first, therefore, hereby resolved that staff provide a report to council, and this is what we're talking about, that step, before any agreements are signed. So that is of concern, because if that report takes 2 days, that's not an issue. But if it takes 3 months, that is, because the scope of this work in assembling, I can see assembling and scheduling heavy equipment and all those contracts are going to all be held at bay And the concerns that are asked to be met are mitigating measures, which are already there. So I guess I can see your frustration. You've also put down securities. You've also done all these things. So the idea that nothing be signed until these are met is a misunderstanding, because they already are there. So the report should really just be, we should acknowledge that all those things are being done, and maybe we can just, well, we'll have that, but if we were to remove that one part until the agreements are signed, then we'd just be fine going along. And you have no problem with the report coming back, as you've said, and the concern you've identified is just to halt everything. When you've got all this emotion in the minutes, perhaps the gravity and the understanding of what that may entail is not completely understood at this council table, because of the huge, I mean, I can't imagine what you have to schedule. I'm just trying to schedule my life, and I can't imagine what that's like. So what you're doing with hundreds of thousands of people, dollars and stuff, and millions, I guess we're talking about, and working with all our people. So to put a freeze and tell everyone we got to wait for the summer until this is, and until we have any idea. So I understand completely now what that problem is. It's just that one little part. And the reason it's put in there is because we have to understand that these measures are put in place, but they already are in place. Thank you very much.
Councillor Gardner.
No, why don't you answer? Oh. Well, it does say in here that
We're not talking about the motion. We're just to the delegates' presentation.
no, I'm going to leave it for now, Councillor Marcus.
Thank you.
He's talked twice.
Yes.
So I'm just trying to clarify what Councillor Abel said. The subdivision agreements haven't been signed yet. That would have to be a question to Mr. Muno.
Mr. Muno? Well, Ms. Shindrick? This is better discussed. You have a subdivision agreement. Councillor Gardner's question was whether or not the subdivision agreement had been signed.
To Councillor Gardner, no, it has not been signed. Permits have been issued. Securities have been posted in conjunction with those permits. The next step would be the pre-servicing agreement, where there will be further securities posted, and many of these measures are attached as a schedule to that agreement.
Councillor? Councillor? Good? All right, thank you. Ms. Shindrick, there seems to be some concern about the size of projects that Geranium has been involved in. Perhaps you could give a quick update on what Friday Harbor, how big it is and how well it went.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Mayor, for that question. Friday Harbor is a 600-acre site in the town of Innisfil, consisting of 2,000 resort units, 1,000 slip marina, an 18-hole golf course. We do build them as well. It's been under the purview of, I think, every agency, government agency in the province, including some federal agencies, Departments of Fisheries and Oceans and Transport Canada. And we've been very successful in meeting all of the environmental targets and requirements, and we've been applauded for our work in the redevelopment of an old marina. It was an old marina that we have restored and rehabilitated and really brought into environmental excellence. Thank you for the question.
Thank you. Council, that's, I see no more questions. All in favor of receipt, please. Receipt and refer. Contrary? That's carried. Thank you very much. Second, Councillor Marcus, obviously. Back to you, Councillor Gardner.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And to me, it's very simple. As members of council, we have a duty to protect the best interests of our residents, and council and staff have a responsibility to ensure that the process goes smoothly with the minimum amount of inconvenience and frustration an intrusion into the lives of the residents. Councillor Maracas and I discussed this, and especially what could be done proactively. Once the agreement is signed, it's too late. There's been a lot of discussion by the developer. The word conversation has been used a lot. I'm not looking for conversation. I'm looking for, from staff, a report, what we can do in writing. It's very different and it's very important. And that's all that I'm going to say now. I'm going to listen to council.
Thank you, Councillor Gartner. Other speakers, please. Councillor Kim.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First, I do want to thank Councillor Maracas and Councillor Gartner for bringing this motion forward. Certainly, anything that helps residents, anything that protects their interests, anything that helps guide the process through as smoothly as possible so that their lives are not encumbered. Anytime there's a large-scale development, there's always going to be some discomfort. You can't remove that, but you certainly, as a town, want to do the most that we can to ensure that everything goes as smoothly as possible. So I thank the councillors for bringing it forward. I think also a comment that, make no mistake, we're all in agreement that we want the residents within the Highland Gate community to have a smooth and smooth transition throughout this build. I think there's just a misinterpretation of maybe it's a legal interpretation. So I just want to clarify that, and in terms of also what the partnership with working with Highland Gate Development Inc. Has been. So through you, Mr. Mayor, to Mr. Ramuno, how have your dealings been with HCDI since the finalization of the minutes of settlement?
Mr. Ramuno, please.
Certainly. Through you, Mr. Mayor, we've had a very good working relationship with the Highland Gate Development folks. Ever since the board decision, we have been meeting since the early January on a regular basis, at least once a month to deal with the future development approvals, implementations, working towards putting together agreements, preparing the various permit applications, and actually working out a protocol and management plan for the future construction activities. And they have taken their own initiative in going above and beyond our normal process. And Ms. Shindrick did mention a few things that they have done with respect to, of course, with the amount of meetings they're having with the ratepayers associations, with the residents that back onto the course, pre-construction surveys, a number of other things as well, in particular setting up their hotline to deal with any issues that may arise during the construction activity of the first phase.
Councillor Kim.
Has any of your staff had any complaints in their dealings with Highland Gate Development?
Mr. Ramuno.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, no, we haven't had any complaints. And I as well as Mr. Downey and our respective staff, have attended most of those meetings with the group.
Councillor Kim.
And how would you compare, we've gone through a lot of developments from small infills to large, like the 2B, 2C lands. How would you compare your working relationship with HCDI compared to other builders?
Mr. Ramuno.
Through you, Mr. Chair, it's been a very positive working relationship. Again, they've been very accommodating. Again, we've been meeting on a regular basis, and they've been willing to, again, go above and beyond our standard processes and protocols that we have in place.
Councillor Kim.
Yes, and we've all read, we were forwarded from the clerk the response to the motion in writing from our clerk yesterday, and we all had time to read it. And it seems like all the concerns that are in the motion, they've readily responded to. Do you feel that this extra layer is necessary?
Mr. Romero?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. No, again, I don't have an issue, and as we heard, considering the scale of the development, I don't have a problem if council directs me to provide a report, and I can have something for even the June council cycle, just outlining the current processes that we have in place and how we're going to manage the construction activity, and in particular, how we're going to be able to enforce all our requirements through the various pre-servicing and subdivision agreements.
June or July cycle?
July. Did I say June? Yeah. July.
Councilor Kim.
Mr. Ramuno, we just approved 4 applications in the last council. And we gave authorizations to the clerk and mayor to strike various agreements similar to this, all on different scales. And so my question is, why do we have to treat this different? I'm fine with, if we're going to have a different process for different builders or different sites, then I think we should investigate that from a total policy perspective at the town level. So I'm happy to entertain that. I just like consistency and follow our existing protocol, and I'm just kind of wary of singling this project out when there's been no indications that we need to highlight this project in particular, given that Highland Gate Development, Inc. has been very cooperative. They've demonstrated over the last few months that they're willing to go above and beyond what is necessary. And so I just want some consistency and not just highlight this one development. Through you, Mr. Mayor, to our solicitor, this motion, wording is everything, and the motion states that in the first clause, if I can bring that out, that before any agreements are signed, that outlines all measures. So it seems like there's conditions. If we refuse to, if we have any issues with some of the process at this point, what would it mean to us if we decided to decide that there's an issue?
Mr. Sarah?
Through you, Mayor Dodd, to Councillor Kim, it would prevent staff from bringing the agreements to the mayor and clerk for signature. The agreements will still be finalized or finished from staff, but when we bring it to the mayor, we wouldn't be able to bring it to the mayor and clerk.
Councillor Kim, you've got about 30 seconds left.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So even if we can't bring it to the mayor and the clerk, will the project still continue?
Mr. Sarah?
Through you, Mayor Daw, no, because we need a valid agreement, fully enforceable, executed agreement in order to go ahead with the project.
Councillor Kim?
The settlement of the minutes of the settlement, right?
Mr. Sarah?
Through you, Mayor Daw, if council and staff and everyone can't come to a conclusion, then yes, it would be a breach because then the agreements will not be signed.
Okay. So thank you, Mr. Mayor. That raises a great point, because I did not think that. I thought this motion would be more of a guideline. It's kind of a neutral thing, but there could be very well legal implications down the road. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kim. Councillor Peary, Abel Humphreys.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And through you, just to start, I will state that I respectfully disagree with Mr. Serio's last statements. So ultimately, what we're going to be doing right now for the next half hour, 45 minutes, is discussing the words before any agreements are signed. I think everybody around this council table agrees that, getting staff to come to us, write a report, giving us, we've received the developer's position on what they're doing. I would want something that our staff is doing to come back to us to provide that out and see if there's anything else that the developer has missed. I think everybody around the table would agree to that. So really what we're going to be doing for the next half hour, 45 minutes, I'm giving the people watching at home, the knowledge that they can go for a bathroom break if they so wish. We're going to be talking about any agreements before any agreements are signed. So the reason I disagreed with our solicitor, I see these 5 words as a timing issue. So through you to the clerk, we did make a motion to have our staff sign the minutes of settlement, correct?
Mr. Clerk?
Through you, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, that was before my time. I'd have to look it up, but that seems like a very, yes, I'm sure we did.
Last fall.
So if a motion is coming forward here today that would impede us moving forward with the execution of those minutes of settlement, would they not be contradictory to the motion to sign the minutes of settlement, which means that we understand them and we're moving forward on them?
Mr. Clerk? Or Mr. Serio? I'm not sure which.
Would you like to repeat? So, because we've sent staff away to sign and agree to the minutes of settlement, if we're now going to be presenting a motion that would impede the execution of that agreement, would it not be a contradictory motion?
Mr. Serio?
I have to think about this. I wouldn't necessarily say it's contradictory. Like, it could be contradictory, but it's all in terms of, even as town staff, the practice of bringing the agreements to the mayor and clerk for signature. So yes, they do have authority to sign the agreements. I don't know. But I'm back to your initial response, your initial comment. Before any agreements are signed, you're right, could be seen as more of a timing issue. So it's not. Okay.
Sorry, I don't want to let somebody else get to the punchline. So my view is, if we're taking the belief that the words "before any agreements are signed" to mean that we're going to be impeding the minutes of settlement, then I think that this motion is contradictory and we shouldn't be looking at it. If, however, what we're doing is asking to come back on a timing issue, and we'd like to see this report before any of our staff members go and present a report to the mayor to sign, whether or not we agree or disagree with that report at that time, I think is irrelevant, because staff have a direction to execute the minutes of settlement, so they're going to be moving forward along those lines. For me, what I understand and what I see before me is that we would like a report back to us quickly. That's my interpretation, because anything else in my view, I mean, if I've stumped a lawyer, there could be an argument made, but anything else in my opinion could be contradictory. So I think if we're moving forward, it would be my understanding that this is an information report coming back to us, and strictly an information report coming back to us. And if we're moving forward with the belief that it's a report for a motion which could impede something we've already agreed to, I don't think it's in order. So maybe we can get some clarity, but it's my understanding that this is just it would be my expectation that this is just a report for information. And I'm okay with that. And if that's not the case, then I think we should take that clause out, because it makes it contradictory.
Excuse me, thank you, Councillor Perry. Councillor Abel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If I could just ask the two councillors on their notice of motion, through you, Mr. Chair, Mr. Mayor, did you contact staff on the provisions that Geranium had put forward?
Councillor Gartner.
Correct. this motion came out of the mitigation, the construction and communications mitigation plan that I saw and we shared from the developer. And it is a timing issue. The intent of this motion is not to stop the development. We can't do that. The intent of the motion is to have as much in writing, to make sure that staff has as much in writing as possible, and that council knows what's in writing, so that we can just protect our residents and have a smooth construction process. So, yeah, it's a timing issue.
Okay, Councillor Abel, did I answer your question?
No, Mr. Mayor. I asked if they had contacted staff, so I'm going to assume no, but Councillor Marakis may be able to add.
Councillor Marakis?
Councillor Marakis, did you contact staff about what mitigations were put in place?
I've spoken to staff many times about this. It's not the matter of what, once again, as Councillor Gardner has mentioned, it's not what the developer is doing to put in place. This motion is about what is staff going to do to ensure that those, the mitigation plan and any procedures that are going to be followed. What is staff going to do to ensure to our residents and to this council that those procedures are going to be followed? That's what this motion is about. Quite honestly, it's not up to me to look at what the developers, call them up and find out what they're doing. My job is to go through staff, and that's what I did.
Councillor Marakis. Councillor Abel.
I'm going to assume that you have talked to staff, but you didn't ask them what mitigations have been put in place. And I'm just going to ask that, I didn't know the detail, but and I thank the questions being asked, because the responses convince me that we are proceeding to safeguard, and actually Geranium Homes and staff are going that extra mile, if you prefer, to make sure that there are mitigations in place. Knowing what I know now, I'm quite comfortable taking out before any agreements are signed, because all the mitigation concerns have been met and have been discussed with staff, and I would only ask that that part be removed, and I think you would have a unanimous vote saying yes, bring a report on. Mr. Mayor, through you, I believe Mr. Ramuno said that he could have that report for us by next Tuesday.
No, July. July.
Well, I mean, I still would like to, I think in the spirit of working together with our development, that all our developers that are here, and we have a great reputation. I've had a few of them say how different the municipality of Aurora is to work with, and how the staff are. And we have often had complaints about dust or litter, and we have very quickly had staff move in to correct those situations in other developments. And I'm, with a hotline and teams going around to individual residents in phases, I am quite comfortable eliminating that. And the Geranium Homes has brought their team out to say they have no problem if they could just remove that one little part. Our solicitor said the same. So I would like to amend it by just removing before any agreements are signed, and move forward with that. And
Sir, is that an amendment?
yes, I would like to make that amendment.
Is there a second for Councillor Abel's amendment? Councillor Kemp? So the amendment is to remove the wording before any agreements are signed. Is that correct, sir? So, Councillor Abel, if you wish to speak to that.
Yeah, I'll speak to the amendment, and I think in the spirit of working with our developer here, we should be welcome development into our community, and our ratepayers have not expressed any concern. In fact, the concerns have been brought forward by Councillors Marakis and Gardner, that they have concerns, that they want to make sure that these mitigation factors are put in place for our residents, and I'm convinced that they are in place. I thank them for bringing that to my attention, because I wasn't aware of it. I thank Geranium Homes, Ms. Shendrick, for bringing all that detail forward, and your team. And I think it's unnecessary to put that there, the way it reads to me is that none of these things have been in place, and it's just a matter of interpretation, as their solicitor had said. And I think in fairness, having the response that we've heard, that it would be incumbent upon us to extend the same spirit of cooperation and willingness to work and remove that one little part and get that report back to us in as quick a fashion as possible. To leave it in is, I just think is unnecessary, based on everything that I've heard. So I think moving forward, we should show that council that's how we, that's what we're made about, and our residents should be assured that all the mitigations are in place and known and public right at this point. And our staff will bring a report probably reflecting a very similar sentiment as Mr. Ramuno has already said. So,
Councillor Gardner.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I'm going to give some examples of why I think we need to have these things before us, before any agreements are signed. If you look at item number 2, page 2 of the letter, section 1.2. Should an issue not be rectified by HGDI after receiving notice by the town is able to draw on the financial securities to rectify the matter. So, what I would like to have in writing is, what are the parameters around using these securities? We need to know when they're going to come into play, how much we can use, how long we give the developer to rectify this. Second thing, it's 1.3. HGDI is working constructively with town staff to address concerns as they arise in a timely manner. We've gotten into trouble before. We need to know who on our town staff is the responsible person. Where does the buck stop? And it may be more than one person. It may be one person for the servicing agreements. It may be one person for the construction. We need to know that. That information has to come back to us. With respect to 1.6, the enforcement of the agreement in regard to the developer's letter of credit, same comment. It says the ability to draw upon a posted security to rectify the matter. I want to know the parameters around that. As I said, the height of the dust fence is different than in the mitigation plan that was given to the residents. So I want to know, it's mentioned it can be between 1 and 1.5 meters. We were told 6 feet. That 6 feet is 1.83 meters. I want to know what it is, because we saw from the experience in the east part of Aurora with State Farm what happened when there was a lot of dust flying around, and the problems it caused for that business. In this case, we have residents. The thing about the community call line, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, well, that's going to be an answering service. So what are the timelines? How quickly does the developer staff have to get back to the residents? What happens if the issues can't be resolved between the developer and the residents? Then what happens with town staff? Are we as a council going to be getting calls to try and rectify something that we really can't? Nothing has been mentioned about the roads. There's going to be a lot of heavy trucks on our roads. There's going to be a lot of wear and tear. There may be damage. So who's going to be responsible for that? These are things that we need to know as a council. We need to be able to have them in writing, and there'll be no misunderstanding with the developer. It really is to everybody's benefit. And I'm very opposed to taking out the clause that Councillor Abel said, because as I said, once agreements are signed, we have no power. This is when we have the power to make things the way we want them to be for the residents.
Councillor Gardner. Councillor Kim.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just on that last comment from Councillor Gardner, when you speak about power, I mean, this development decision has already come and gone. Development's going to happen. So, you know, really all this is about is mitigation procedures. And so through that, and certainly we want all the mitigation processes in place because we want what's best for our residents. There's no doubt of that. And I think it's, you know, frankly, I'm really disappointed that we're having this discussion because we all want the same thing. Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Mr. Ramuno, do we have existing construction agreements and mitigation plans in place? I'm sure that's a standard procedure just because every municipality has developments. And with development, there's dust concerns, there's grading concerns, water. So can you confirm that, please?
Mr. Ramuno.
So through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Kim, yes, we do standard protocol for most municipalities. It's typically handled through the subdivision agreement, also the pre-servicing agreement. We've already issued a topsoil removal permit, and so we've secured a letter credit for that work. So yeah, the provisions of the conditions of approval through the minutes of settlement are enforced through the subdivision agreements. And construction management plans or conditions that you'll find in most conditions of approval related to subdivision developments. And we have bylaws, our noise bylaw as well, that deals with construction activity or prohibition between 7 p.m. and 7 a.m. the next day. And we've got dust control measures as conditions within the agreements.
Councillor Kim.
Thank you, Mr. Ramuno. And I guess that's my point in that all these mitigation procedures are already in place. And if this is a special development that requires other mitigation procedures, and we want to ensure that those are in place, I'm all for Councillor Gardner's and Marakis' motion to have those mitigations in place and put it in writing for informational only. I think HCDI has already demonstrated that they're willing to go above and beyond. Staff has already confirmed that they've been willing and able partners. And so, and given that they've already have started working on the land, they've started grading, the topsoil is you know, half removed, the trees are removed. It seems like us as a partner, we're kind of putting new rules to the game when all the other stakeholders are willing to work as willing partners. You know, in terms of, you know, hiccups, you know, in terms of dust, whether they put, you know, they agreed to 6-foot fencing, which I understand is you know, higher than the standard. You know, whether they put 6 feet or even 20 feet, there's still going to be dust. You know, residents, this is going to be their first time through this. It's everyone's first time through this. When we get a sense of dust, we're going to say, oh, it's not working because there's dust, but there will always be dust. You know, in my neighborhood, in the first 5 years of development, all the mitigation places were put in place in 2C, but I still got dust. You know, that's, you know, I expected it, and I don't think if there was a higher fencing or screen that anything's going to change. So there will be some discomfort. How could there not be in a development? And just, you know, to respond to Councilor Marakis' point in that he reiterated that this motion is really for staff, to ensure that staff is doing its job. I mean, this is a just internal policies, procedures, protocol issue. This is like an efficiency matter. This can be handled internally. I'm not sure that it's requiring of a motion so that our staff works efficiently and does its job. Why do we have to bring Highland or Geranium into this if it's an internal operational issue? because I know that some of us are disappointed in the way that other developments have worked out. I know Tyler has been pointed out one or two times, and certainly that was, staff could have done potentially a better job there. But if it's an internal issue, then it doesn't have to bring our other partners into this or stakeholders because it's strictly internal. I think earlier Councillor Gardner agreed that this was informational only, and so if it stays that way, I'm perfectly fine with it, and I'm perfectly fine with the the spirit and the principle of the motion, because again, we all agree that we want mitigation procedures in place, and we'll certainly, I'm sure all of us will call Marco on his cell phone every 2 hours to make sure that everything's okay with the residents, because we want the residents to be in a good place. Thank you.
Councillor Kim. Councillor Maracas.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is a timing. All it is a timing situation. The agreement has not been signed. It needs to be signed. And so let's make sure what are those procedures that staff are going to enforce and how they're going to enforce them before we sign the agreement. Let's have that knowledge. Let's get this around the table. Let's get that communicated to our residents. Through you, Mr. Chair, to Mr. Ramuno. Mr. Ramuno, who does the enforcement? Would that be the developer or the town?
Mr. Ramuno.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, it's town staff.
Councillor.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair, to Mr. Ramuno as well. And who does the monitoring? Would that be the staff as well, the town staff?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Combination, obviously, the developer's consulting engineer will be on site. They need to provide reports and certification for the servicing work, but our town inspectors will also be out monitoring and inspecting during the construction period.
Councillor.
Thank you, Mr. Ramuno. So, for me, that's part of the whole thing with this motion is to look at, how staff can enforce it. How many times are they going to go out and monitor it? These are some of the things that I'd like to know, and those are the details. And as they say, the devil's in the details. We need to know those details. Our residents need to know those details. If we're just going to leave it and just decide, hey, you know what, let's just leave it. Let's trust that the mitigation plan is going to be in effect and it's going to happen and it's going to be according to the way that everyone says that it's going to be. We've seen that play out before as well. We've had a task force developed for the JOC, and we decided not to go into the details, and look what happened with that one. So I say it's important that we get those details from our staff on how this is going to be enforced, how it's going to be monitored for our residents within a stable neighborhood. This is a unique development. It's first of its kind. To say that it's similar to any other development, to say that it's the same as something that was developed in the 2C area or in the 2B area, that's not correct. We're within people that are currently living there, and this is going to be right in their backyard. So we need to ensure that it's going to be the least amount of disruption to our community as a whole. And so I think it's important that we get a report stating on how our staff is going to go about to make sure that what the developer is telling us that they are going to do is going to happen. And so that's all this motion is asking for. And it's saying that before we sign that agreement, we know we have to sign it, but before we sign it, let's have staff bring us that report and tell us how they're going to make sure that all of this is going to happen. And so I think it's quite clear, and I think it's a pretty standard motion. I don't see the difficulty in moving forward with this. We're not impeding, we're not stopping any development. So I'm against the amendment.
Councillor Don.
Thank you, Mayor Dodd. Obviously, there's been a lot of talk about this. Just so I'm clear, it appears the motion as written, the two members who have written the motion have indicated that it's a timing issue as opposed to anything else. But I'm questioning how staff would interpret this clause. So, clearly we have on the agenda from GC, we have a number of site plan approvals and various planning matters that are coming before council for approval, and that also require that the mayor and town clerk be authorized to execute agreements. So I guess I'd like to know if it's just timing and we're going to get a report back before any of those agreements would come to council for approval, that's something feasible by staff? I mean, when were they planning on bringing the next agreement with respect to this motion? I mean, obviously there's a number of agreements still to come, so when was that planned to be presented to council? I mean, is it September, or is it October, or is it June? I mean, what?
Mr. Muno?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Council Tom, if your question is when the subdivision agreement or pre-servicing agreement will be ready, I mean, it wouldn't be brought forward to council because, again, that's an administrative matter. We're probably a month or two away from finalizing the pre-servicing agreement and presenting that to the mayor and clerk for execution.
Councillor?
So there's a number of agreements that this line encompasses. It's not just the site plan approval, or it's not just the various planning matters that come before council and general committee to be approved by council. There's many agreements that staff have to undertake with the developer that wouldn't necessarily come to our desk, that would also be halted by this. And so that obviously puts a bit of a halt on the process. If I'm correct, just let me know.
Mr. Muno?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, there will be, in this instance, there'll be two agreements, pre-servicing agreement and then the final full subdivision agreement. And again, at this point, I think we're probably 6 weeks or 6 weeks away from having a pre-servicing agreement ready for execution. Then there'll be a subdivision agreement a few months after that.
Councillor?
What I'm hearing is that if you can bring this back in July, we're not putting a halt onto planning staff's original intent in terms of the timelines. Is that correct?
Mr. Muno?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that's correct. I can have a report if council wishes for July 4th.
Councillor?
Thank you, Mayor Daw. I mean, as long as this wording doesn't impede staff in any way to go about their usual business up until we get the report, it's fine. My only issue is that the way the motion reads, and perhaps it wasn't the intent, but words matter, and sometimes when people read things differently when they read it for the first time. What happens if the report does not reflect the motion's various clauses in terms of mitigation factors? Let's say it either exceeds or doesn't exceed, then are we going to, at that time, I mean, it's irrelevant at this conversation, but the conversation will then be, well, I think this is why the developer is concerned, is that, how do we move forward with signing agreements if council's at loggerheads with the process? And so for me, that's the sticking point. Listen, I was not in favor of the minutes of settlement. I voted against them. I didn't think that the development, in my opinion, was the right way forward for our community, but council as a whole decided to sign the minutes of settlement, and so here we are. So, do I want to report back? Absolutely. I mean, I think we owe it to the residents to monitor the situation. It is an area of significance, but I'll remind council on the agenda tonight on Bayview and St. John's, we have a massive, massive commercial development with, I think, site plan approval for the northeast corner of Bayview and St. John's. I mean, there's a ton of residential very close across both St. John's and Bayview, and new development going in even on the east side. And we're not putting any of these measures that are contemplated tonight in this motion with respect to that development. I mean, I'm sure that the residents in that area of town would love to have some of the extra steps that we're taking with Highland Gate put in place for that area as well. So when Councillor Kim mentioned that, I'd rather take maybe a bird's eye view of this whole scenario, and maybe we can streamline this process a bit better. That's fine. I'd be in favor of that. So I guess my final comment is I've just got assurance from staff that this line doesn't in any way impede them from their current schedule, and the report will be brought back before any agreements were planned to be signed anyways. I'm happy to keep it in, but I just like my opinion to be known that, we had an opportunity to vote against this development, and that has come and gone. Again, my view didn't win out, but now that we have moved forward, I think that we should be fair in our application of our own policies definitely hold the developer to account, but I don't think we should try to in any way use this as a backdoor way to hold up the development. So based on staff's and Marco's answers, I'm going to vote against this. I'm happy to have this report come back before any agreements are signed. However, in no way I'm looking to use that to hold up the development.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Humphreys.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And many of my questions have been answered in terms of speaking to the amendment. For me, I understand the intent of this, and it's to make sure that when I read this and I thought about that we really don't want to be at arm's length of the development in terms of residents' issues, complaints, concerns throughout the process. And I do believe the developer did a great job in terms of what they're doing to mitigate the issues. There's a community hotline that's been up since May the 3rd. All types of measures to abide by our bylaws in terms of new development, but it is in a stable neighborhood. And I always thought, there's a way that we can partner closer so that we can be aware and step in step and hand with the developer as issues come about and can be resolved quickly and efficiently, so that that the issues get addressed quickly for our residents' concerns. But in terms of putting this before any agreements are signed, I didn't realize or think that this would stop any of the development moving forward. I'm hearing it won't, but I need to get a clear answer from staff. I don't want to have, we've already voted on this development, it's moving forward, and we need to make sure it continues to do that way. Postpone the pain, I don't want to do that, and we got to get moving on this, but I just want to make sure that, that we do the right things by our residents, and that staff understand clearly what their obligations are if issues come about and how they learn of them. So I don't mind, I absolutely love, the report in terms of getting this information back to us to hear what our staff will be doing when these issues arise. And I think we asked that at a couple of meetings, I believe, Mr. Ramuno, what was our plan to address some of the concerns that will come, they will happen. So for me, it's more working closely with the developer who's taking full accountability of this development and issues that come about. I saw the signs up with the main numbers to call in if any residents have concerns, which I think is great. I believe they're taking accountability and they're going to be taking ownership of these problems. What happens as councillors is we will be getting the emails, as we already are, on things that they're not happy with, residents aren't happy with. So what are we going to do as councillors? Who do we bring that issue to? How does that work? Is staff going to know before we know that there's a problem, and how do they work, and who do they work with at the developer's end? I think at one point I thought about, why don't we put a committee together, staff, Highland Gate, Right Bear, and the developer together, so that they can monitor all the issues that come in and address them quickly. So for me, this is a mitigation plan. It's a strong plan to work together. I don't want to stop do not want to stop development moving forward. I don't think that line that says before any agreements are signed, it looks like we're 30 to 60 days away. If we get a report back before then, and then my one worry is if we get a report back and we don't like what we see, then what? Then what? That's what I'm really worried about. I'm worried about that one line in there before any agreements are signed. What are we going to do? So I worry about that. So through Mr. Mayor, can someone say, if we get the report back from staff and we don't like what we see, do we stop the development? I need to ask the question. Anybody?
Who would you like to direct that question to?
Mr. Ramuno, or I don't know.
Mr. Ramuno?
It's hard.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Humphreys, since the minutes of settlement were signed and the board decision was issued back in December, staff has been working with the property owner in proceeding to implement the approvals that were put in place. And that means, and I think I've informed council of this, the first step that they did, apart from all their consultation with the residents regarding their landscaping plans for the existing residents, we've been working with them on the first thing was the vegetation management plan. They cleared the trees, submitted a demolition permit. They've done that. The next big construction activity, and we're placing notices on our website, and the developer is advising the Ratepayers Association and the residents, is a topsoil removal permit. Earthworks was issued on just this past Monday. So I just want to be clear. So there are some critical timing issues in that once they start their earthworks, and that's probably a 2-month project, their next phase, and they're timing it this way, as most developers are, is to start their underground servicing work, and they then require that pre-servicing agreement to be executed in order to carry on with the construction activity. First is removing the topsoil, then executing the agreement to start the actual underground services and the road work.
Councillor Humphreys.
So basically, we need a report back before any of that happens. I guess I'm confused. I'll just listen. I'll listen. I'm confused. To me, it sounds before any agreements are signed. Well, we can't sign them until this report comes back. And then when it comes back, if we don't like it, can go back to staff again and negotiate further mitigation plans. Because it actually says in here, and I'm just going to state it, guys, because I just want to make sure, I support the entire idea. I just don't want to stop progress. I want to have this enforced and put in place, but without impeding progress. It says here, should any amendments to our bylaws be requested that will affect residents, an outline of the process, how these will be approved and communicated that affect our community. Are we anticipating bylaws to change? Anyways, talking out loud.
Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Mayor Daw. For the third time. Through you to Mr. Ramuno. So, Mr. Ramuno, you said that you can bring us a report forward on for our GC meeting on July 4th, which means roughly 2 weeks from now we'd get that report. To the best of your knowledge, do any agreements need to be signed in the next 2 weeks?
Mr. Ramuno?
Mr. Mayor, no. Not within 2 weeks.
Thank you, Mr. Ramuno. And listen, I agree with all the comments around the table. This is probably the most significant project the town will ever see. In terms of the size, the scope, the potential for disruption, and so a little additional oversight I think is good. You look at the issues we've dealt with over this term and last with regards to Canada Post and the JLC and the leisure complex, and if we learned anything, a little extra due diligence is a good thing. And so I think it is wise for us to get a report to completely understand, both from our perspective as well as for the residents, what's going to be done, how's it going to be managed, what's involved in the process. And it doesn't seem to be any impact to the developer. As Mr. Ramuno said, it's a 2-week turnaround for this report. And I, as Councillor Tom mentioned, words matter. The motion before us just says to provide a report. It doesn't say that we have to agree with the report. It doesn't say that, we have to approve the report to enable staff to go forward and sign any further agreements or anything. So, I'm comfortable with the way that stands. I think it's a wise move on our part to be completely clear of how we're going to manage this project in conjunction with the developers. This is a long process, and so I look forward to getting that report in 2 weeks' time.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Perry.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I really hate when we start to spin our wheels around the table. So to clarify everything that's gone on around the table, Councillor Marakis and Councillor Gartner have indicated that this report they're seeking is just for information purposes, that there was a request, which again is a timing issue, where they would like the report back before any agreements are signed. That's the timeline for which they're expecting a report back. Mr. Ramuno has indicated that he's got a report ready to go for July the 4th, which again is going to be before any agreements are signed. And then from that point now we've got an amendment that we're going to remove the words before any agreements are signed, when Mr. Ramuno's already committed to bringing us a report in 2 weeks. I was a little off on my timeline estimate. It was longer than a half an hour to 45 minutes. We're spinning our wheels. We're all talking about the same thing in different languages, it seems. I think there's been enough said around the table to indicate to the developers that any reports that come back are not going to be.
Certainly. Through you, Mr. Mayor, Councillor Humphreys, typically complaints come in directly to town staff. And of course, if we do get calls that come into the planning department, we will deal with them and we'll work with the developers' staff to resolve those issues. And we will be reporting back to council on a regular basis. We've already, as part of our protocol, established a process where we're going to work with the applicant's hotline and monitor the amount of calls that they get, ensure that they are addressed in a timely fashion.
Great.
Councillor?
Good, thank you, Mr. Mayor. And this is why I think why we're feeling the way we are is normally we take all the calls, we take the responsibility, we take the complaints, dust, everything. And I feel that developer has stepped up and taking on this role, which I believe will offload staff in many cases. I'm just saying, like, if they get a complaint and they address it, the resident won't call us. So I feel that staff will have less of a workload. If this works the way it's intended, it's a beautiful mitigation plan. What we're trying to do here with this motion is we need to step up our game too. As a councillor, I want to know what's happening out there, and I know that the developer is working very closely with staff, and they have all their meetings, and I'm confident that things will go well. But when they don't, I believe as councillors we need to know, and that's why I like this motion. Only not to interfere or to get in the middle, but to make sure that we are aligned with what's happening, we hear what's going on, we get that to us. And I love that Mr. Mamuna will be reporting to us on how things are going, issues that arise, how we've addressed them. And I believe that this is just going to clarify the questions we've been asking of staff since everything was signed. So for me, that's how I read this. I hope that the developer or Highland Gate residents don't feel that, we're trying to impede or stop anything at all. For me, it's working together and having staff be very, very aware of what's going on, that we understand what's happening. We have a pulse on what's going on. We are going to continue to get, I know we're getting emails. Who do I call? Do I call the 800 number? Do I call staff? So this is why I believe we need that interim measure. Because I don't want to be calling the 800 number because they're going to get sick and tired of hearing from me, but hopefully not. But I think that's really, for me, I support the motion because of this reason, that we need to be a part of this process. I feel that, again, I'm grateful to the developer to take a very strong role in making sure it goes well and that issues are addressed. But I do believe as staff and as councillors, Mayor, we need to know what's happening out there. And I think this will allow that to happen, and it'll be more official, and staff will know what they're doing. Just one last question. Will we be monitoring the site just like we would any other development for dust, road issues, debris, things of that nature? Or do we, will that come through a reactive perspective? I just want to know from my own perspective.
Mr. Muno?
Mr. Mayor, no, our engineers, inspectors will be on site on a regular basis monitoring the construction activities.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Tom.
Thank you, Mayor Daw. I said most of my what I wanted to say when speaking to the amendment. Staff and Mr. Ramuda made it clear that this is going to be coming back before there's going to be any undue impact with respect to the developer, and I'm looking forward to seeing the report when it comes back on July 4th. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Tom. Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Mayor Daw. Just briefly, I certainly don't see this motion as any attempt to subvert the minutes of settlement or the process. It really is just, to increase our comfort level that everything is in place and that, as Councillor Humphrey says, we're the ones that feel the calls. Even applications we've approved on Ridge Road and other places, we still receive calls to this day. And so, to me, I think it's a show of good faith on both parts that we just want to be comfortable in what's being proposed and how it's going to be managed, and that I hope that the developers will also be out in 2 weeks to hear the comments at that time.
Councillor Kim.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I guess my only I'm fine with this now that we've kind of dug several layers, and it seems like we're all in agreement that this is informational only, and it's a guideline. I'm not sure if everyone considers it that way, because when you read it the next day and you don't view the discussion, you won't know. So I think I heard it from Councillor Gartner on tape that it was informational. So through you, Mr. Mayor, I just want to hear from Councillor Tom, the other author, whether this is being viewed as informational from your perspective, please.
You mean
Mr. Tom? Oh, I meant Councillor Marakis.
That's Tom with no H. Councillor Marakis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So to answer that question, my intentions have never been to stop or impede the development, as has been mentioned around the table. It's to get a clarification on what staff is going to do to ensure that all the measures that are being put in place are going to be adhered to, and that the least amount of disruption to our residents and to our community are going to happen. That's all I'm looking for in regards to this motion. So.
Councillor Kim?
So is that a yes or a no? You seem to be asking that question a lot. So I just
Councillor Marakis?
I don't know how else to put it. I'm not looking to impede the development. I'm looking to get information from staff. That's on how they're going to make sure that the mitigation measures are going to be in place.
Okay, Councillor Abel. I'm sorry, Councillor Kim?
to you, Mr. Mayor, then, I mean, we all want to ensure that, but that's kind of a very broad response. And so if you're not satisfied with the report, what's the next step in your mind then, through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Marakis?
Councillor Marakis?
I didn't know I was going to be interrogated tonight, but I will go along with this. If I don't agree with the report, or I think that there's other measures, I think, as Councillor Tom mentioned in his statement, everyone knows my stance on what on the actual development. But I'm not looking to get into any type of legal battle with anyone. I think that the decision of this council was made, and therefore I would adhere to that moving forward. I just want to make sure, as I stated, that everything is in place for the best for our community. That's all I'm looking for. But if I don't agree with it, then I don't agree with it, and I'll state it. But obviously, we need to move forward at that point.
Councillor Kim?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Marakis.
Councillor Abel?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And, Councillor Humphreys kind of brings a different light onto it. If someone calls us, who are we going to call? And we have this report, we're all going to know, as well as the public, it will be public. What has been learned at this stage is a great deal has already taken place and has been on the part of the developer and our staff. I mean, almost everything has been answered and addressed in this. And all we need to do is formalize it so we have it on a piece of paper, sort of now we can put it on a bulletin board and go, okay, this is what we're going to do. And that's great. It is sort of internal. There are some outstanding initiatives on the part of Geranium above and beyond what we see in others. And I think the key thing is that this is a very unique situation. It's recognized by our council, it's recognized by our staff, and it's recognized by the developer. And if we want to bring all these challenges and concerns out into the open, this is a good, healthy report that we will have. And it's not meant to be disruptive. The concerns from the developer said, in their mind, it was like it could. They have a bit of concern. We've addressed that concern. Notwithstanding, we're going ahead with this. So let's go ahead, and the report is coming forward in our general committee advance agenda in 2 weeks. We'll have a pretty good idea in writing what this discussion we had today was about. So I'm along the lines of Councillor Perry. If there's no one else speaking, let's call the question and move on.
Thank you, Councillor Abel. I actually wanted to speak before you did, but that's okay. That's my direction. I don't support it, and the reason I don't support it is because it's been said a number of times, words matter. And there's absolutely no direction in here, excuse me, there's no direction in here for Mr. Rumuno to come back at any time. There's no date requirement for Mr. Rumuno to come back on a report. There's not even as soon as possible. Now, Mr. Rumuno is very much a man of his word, and I have no doubt that he'll be back when he says he will. But there's no direction. So if for some reason Mr. Rumuno does not come back with a report, direction is we do not sign any agreements. That is the direction. So therefore, we don't sign the agreements, and then we will be in violation of the minutes of settlement. So if someone would like to add a friendly amendment, at the very least, that directs a date for this report to come back by, I will be a whole lot more comfortable. There was a couple of comments that this is the first of its kind development in Aurora. That's absolutely not correct. We moved into Aurora in 1977. In 1979, the farmer's field that I moved on to was developed right up against the stable neighborhood. In the late 80s, the golf course that we're talking about right now was developed in a stable neighborhood. There is a development that's going in right now in northeast Aurora, 109 houses, I think. Now, it happens to be going right up against Newmarket, but that's a stable neighborhood. So they do happen. So it's not maybe the first of its type on a golf course, and I will certainly buy into that. But it's not the first that's going into a stable neighborhood. And I think we need to be aware of that. It's not the first, it's certainly not the last. So if someone would like to put in a friendly amendment that at least adds the date, I will support it. Otherwise, I will not support it. Councillor Humphreys? Oh. I'm sorry, I've got Councillor Maracas and Gardner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I have no issue at where it says now, therefore be here resolved that staff provide a report by July 4th council meeting before any agreements and then continue. I have no issues with adding that in as long as Councillor Gardner is okay with that as well.
Councillor Gardner?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm fine with that.
And that would be a friendly amendment, Mr. Clerk. Okay. I have no other speakers at this time. I'll call the vote then. All in favor? Certainly.
Recorded vote has been asked for the motion 8B, Highland Gate redevelopment. Councillor Maracas, how do you vote? Yes. Councillor Maracas votes yes. Councillor Peary? Yes. Councillor Peary votes yes. Councillor Thompson? Yes. Councillor Thompson votes yes. Councillor Abel?
Yes.
Councillor Abel votes yes. Councillor Humphreys?
Yes.
Councillor Humphreys votes yes. Councillor Tom? Yes. Councillor Tom votes yes. Councillor Gardner? Yes. Councillor Gardner votes yes. Mayor Daw?
Yes.
Mayor Daw votes yes. Councillor Kim? Yes. Councillor Kim votes yes. The motion passes.
Thank you. Councillor